The wind howled across the Oklahoma plains, dragging dry tumbleweeds across the dusty horizon. Evening shadows stretched long over the land, and the sun, a crimson coin sinking into the earth, lit the sky on fire. The only sign of life was the silhouette of a lone rider crossing a ridge, his hat low, his shoulders heavy with silence. His name was Eli McCall, and he was a man carved from the same grit as the land he rode. Eli was in his late 30s, though the lines on his weathered face made him look older. A once prosperous cattleman, he had watched his life unravel after a tragic fire took both his wife, Clara, and their only son, Jacob, 3 winters ago. Since then, he spoke little, trusted less, and spent his days tending to what was left of. His ranch, an isolated plot nestled between low hills and the untamed woodlands edging Cherokee territory. It was on one of his routine rides to check the cattle fence that Eli first heard it, a faint, broken cry, so soft the wind nearly stole it away. He pulled up on his reins, boots tight in the stirrups, his head cocked to the side. Another cry. This one sharper. It was not the sound of a wounded animal or the call of a coyote. It was human, young, female, frantic. Eli's brow furrowed. He tapped his heels and his horse trotted forward, ears perked as though it too sensed something unnatural in the dusk. He rode toward the sound, weaving through brittle grass and overgrown brush until he reached a small clearing surrounded by dead trees scorched from a lightning fire the year before. The air was still, and the cries had grown weaker now, more like whimpers. Then he saw her. She was bound to a blackened tree trunk, wrists tied tight above her head with coarse rope. Her long dark hair hung in snarled clumps, matted with blood and dirt. Her dress, more of a shift, was torn and soaked through, her bare feet scraped raw from being dragged across the prairie. She was Cherokee, unmistakably so. Eli dismounted slowly. He didn't speak. He wasn't sure she'd understand him, and he didn't want to frighten her further. She lifted her head with what strength she had left. Her eyes wide and full of pain locked onto his. She looked no older than 14. "Easy now," Eli said in a low, gentle voice, his hands raised. As he approached, "I ain't gonna hurt you." Her body flinched anyway, like a wounded animal bracing for another strike. Her lips moved, forming sounds he didn't understand, broken Cherokee words, desperate and pleading. She was begging for her life. Eli's jaw clenched. Someone had left this child here to die. He pulled out his knife and carefully cut the ropes from her wrists. She crumpled to the ground as soon as she was freed, her arms like dead weight. He crouched beside her, gently checking her for injuries. Her arms were bruised, her shoulders dislocated from being strung up so long. Her lips were cracked, her breath shallow. "Can you walk?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back briefly, then fluttered open again. Eli swore under his breath. There was no way she'd survive another night out here, not in this condition. He scooped her up in his arms and carried her to his horse. She trembled against him but didn't resist. Her skin was burning with fever, her breathing raspy. Once mounted, Eli cradled her carefully in front of him, steadying her as he turned his horse toward home. The ride back to the cabin was long, made slower by the need to keep her from slipping. The sky darkened around them, and the air grew cold. By the time they reached the small log house nestled between twin oaks, the girl had gone limp again in his arms. Inside, the cabin was humble. A wood-burning stove, a bed, a table, and a faded photograph of Clara and Jacob sitting near the hearth. Eli gently laid the girl on his bed and began boiling water. He worked quickly, grabbing clean rags, whiskey, and a wool blanket. He cleaned her wounds as best he could, wincing as he saw the whip marks across her back, fresh, angry stripes that told a story of violence and cruelty. Her fingers were swollen and bruised from struggling against the rope. Whoever had done this had no intention of letting her live. He poured a small amount of water between her lips. She coughed, sputtered, then swallowed. Her eyes blinked open again, searching his face. "Name?" Eli asked softly. She looked confused, then tried to speak. Ayoka, she whispered, her voice hoarse like wind across gravel. Eli nodded. Ayoka. It was a beautiful name, he thought. It meant she brought happiness in Cherokee. It was a cruel irony for a girl who'd clearly known nothing but suffering as night fell. Eli sat by the stove, watching over her as she slept in his bed. His rifle leaned against the wall, and the fire popped in the hearth. Outside, the prairie was quiet but not peaceful. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone had done this on purpose, that it was a message or a crime they didn't expect anyone to find. He didn't know where Ayoka had come from, who had hurt her, or why she had been left to die on his land, but he knew one thing. She was safe now, and he would kill any man who came back to finish what they started. The early morning light crept in through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, painting soft golden stripes across the floor. Eli McCall stirred in the old rocking chair by the fire, his rifle resting across his lap, the smoke from the dying embers curling upward like ghosts from another time. He hadn't slept out the Cherokee girl. Ayoka still lay curled on his bed beneath the thick wool blanket. Her breathing was steady now, but her body remained limp, as if her spirit were hovering just outside of her. Her fever had not broken, and Eli didn't know if it would. He stood slowly, his bones stiff from the long night, and crossed the room to check on her. He touched her forehead, still warm, but not burning like before. Eli had tended to sick cattle and injured ranch hands before, but this was different. This was a child fragile and hunted, strung between two worlds she hadn't chosen. She stirred slightly at his touch. Her eyes fluttered open, still hazy from exhaustion and pain. When she saw him, she flinched and tried to pull back. Her breath came in short bursts. She reached for her side as if expecting a weapon. "Easy," Eli said, gently raising his hands. "It's me. You're safe here." He took a few slow steps back, giving her space. Ayoka's eyes darted around the room, suspicious, alert. Then they settled on the cup of water on the small bedside table. She reached out, her hand trembling. Eli stepped forward and handed her the cup. "Drink slow." She took a small sip, then another, and closed her eyes again. A tear slid down her cheek. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I'm Eli," he said after a time. "Eli McCall," she blinked. Her lips moved, unsure. Then she nodded slightly. He tried again. "Where you from? Do you remember?" Ayoka frowned. "Far," she said softly. Her voice was dry, nearly inaudible. She pointed eastward, toward the wooded ridges. Home, gone. Eli's heart twisted. She'd been taken. Maybe from a Cherokee settlement. Maybe by raiders or bounty men. Maybe worse. And they'd left her for dead. He had no idea what to do next. Later that day, Eli saddled his horse and rode out to the edge of the tree line, scanning for any signs, tracks, broken branches, disturbed brush, something, anything. But the wind had scattered most of the clues. Still, something wasn't right. Just before turning back, he spotted it, a strip of fabric snagged on a bramble. It was coarse, torn from a soldier's jacket, faded blue, the kind worn by Army Scouts or vigilante patrols. Dried blood stained the edge. He pocketed the fabric and returned to the cabin with a sense of unease crawling up his spine. That evening, Ayoka sat on the edge of the bed, stronger now, though still cautious. She ate slowly from a bowl of beans and cornbread Eli had made. When she was finished, she set the bowl aside and looked at him. "Why you help?" she asked in broken English. Eli was quiet for a moment. "Because someone had to. he finally said. Ayoka tilted her head, unsure of his meaning. My wife, he said after a pause, staring into the fire, used to say, there's two kinds of men. The ones who ride past trouble and the ones who stop and do something about it. He didn't mention Clara's death, or Jacob's. That wound was still too raw. But Ayoka seemed to understand. She nodded solemnly, then lay back down, pulling the blanket over her thin frame. That night, Eli dreamed of flames, of Clara screaming from their burning house, of Jacob's small hands pounding on a window he couldn't break. He woke in a cold sweat. The fire was dying again. He threw on another log and stood at the window, staring out at the moonlit prairie. Then he saw a movement. At first, he thought it was a deer or a coyote, but it was too steady, too slow. A shape tall, thin stood at the edge of the woods. Watching, Eli didn't move. His hand slowly reached for the rifle. The figure turned and vanished into the trees. The next morning, Eli didn't tell Ayoka about what he saw. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had tied her to that tree wasn't far. And maybe, just maybe, they knew she was still alive. Ayoka helped him gather water from the nearby creek, limping slightly. As they walked, she pointed at birds, whispered words in Cherokee, smiled shyly when Eli repeated them with a poor accent. He hadn't heard laughter in years. It startled him. At the creek, Ayoka knelt and touched the water reverently. She muttered a prayer, then cupped her hands and splashed her face. Eli turned away to give her privacy, but noticed something upstream. More footprints. Fresh ones. Multiple sets. Barefoot. Some booted, leading in the same direction he'd found her. He motioned for Ayoka to stay behind him as he slowly approached the tracks. They disappeared into the thicket. Eli crouched, examined them, then stood quickly. Someone had been here recently, and they were close. Back at the cabin, Eli began reinforcing the windows and adding another lock to the door. He brought in extra firewood, filled water jugs, and loaded his rifle. Ayoka watched him with wary eyes. Bad men come? She asked. Eli paused. I don't know, he admitted, but we'll be ready. That night, as the fire crackled and wind beat against the window panes, Ayoka sat wrapped in her blanket, whispering a song in her language. It was low, mournful, and hauntingly beautiful. A lullaby, perhaps. Eli sat across from her, eyes heavy, the rifle across his knees again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether it would be more footprints, strangers on horseback, or worse. But he knew one thing. He wasn't letting anyone take her again. Not without going through him first. 3 days passed since Eli found Ayoka bound to the tree. Though her body remained fragile, her spirit began to rise. She moved around the cabin now slowly, deliberately, and sometimes helped with small chores like washing bowls or fetching kindling. Her face was still guarded, but she was no longer a trembling shadow. And at night, when the prairie wind moaned through the gaps in the old cabin walls, she whispered to the fire in her language, words meant to keep spirits away. Eli didn't understand most of what she said, but he didn't need to. He knew she was fighting to come back to herself. Still, something gnawed at him. The tracks, the fabric caught in the brush, the shadowed figure by the tree line. Someone had been watching. Someone was still out there. On the 4th day, as Eli rode out to check the western pasture, he saw it, a column of thin gray smoke rising above the distant hills. Not the kind that came from a settler's chimney. This was older, controlled, tribal, a smoke signal. He reined in his horse and squinted. One column, pause, then another, and another. Eli didn't know the Cherokee language of smoke, but he understood one thing. Someone was sending a message, and someone else might be answering. He turned his horse sharply and rode back fast. When he returned, Ayoka was out by the woodpile, stacking branches. She looked up when she saw him and stiffened. Eli's boots hit the porch hard. "You ever see smoke like that?" he asked, pointing west. Ayoka followed his finger, then nodded slowly. "What does it mean?" She hesitated, then replied, "Searching? Searching for you?" He asked. She didn't answer, but her face said enough. "Your people?" he asked more gently. Ayoka's eyes filled with hope and fear all at once. "Maybe." That evening, as they ate beside the hearth, Eli couldn't shake the unease that crawled beneath his skin. If her people were close, that meant others might be too, those who left her to die. And the further she healed, the more she remembered. Later. That night, Ayoka woke from a nightmare. She was gasping, trembling, drenched in sweat. Eli knelt beside her, steadying her shoulders. "Hey, you're all right. You're safe. It's just a dream." But it wasn't just a dream. Through tears and broken English, Ayoka told him what she remembered. She and 2 other girls had been taken from their village, ripped from their homes at dawn by a band of white men dressed like scouts. They weren't military, but they wore old Union blue. Raiders, armed with rifles and rope. They'd struck during a sacred ceremony while most of the village elders were away. The girls were tied and dragged behind horses. One girl had been shot trying to escape. The other, Ayoka didn't know. She had passed out before reaching the place where Eli had found her. And the men? One of them had a scar running from his chin to his collarbone and smelled of whiskey. Another wore a rust-colored coat with brass buttons. But the worst of them, the leader, had cold eyes and a U.S. Army badge on his belt. He had spoken with authority, but there was no honor in his voice. "Only hate. They say we animals," she whispered, tears trailing down her face. "They laugh when we cry." Eli stared into the fire, hands clenched. He had seen evil before, but not like this. "Not so close to home? You remember where they came from?" he asked. Ayoka shook her head. "They say fort, but not real fort. Hide place. A rogue outpost? A cabin? Maybe an abandoned station." He couldn't be sure, but now he had names, images, and that was more than nothing. The next morning, Eli noticed something strange, a symbol carved into a tree at the edge of his land. A spiral sun with 4 lines radiating from it, a Cherokee. Warrior sign, not a threat, a warning. He followed the signs deeper into the trees. Another mark appeared on a rock. Then another, carved in a branch. He was being guided. Watched. Then from the ridge he saw them. 3 riders. All Cherokee. Dressed in leather and fur, armed with bows, knives, and rifles. They didn't approach. Just watched him. Eli slowly raised his hand in peace. The central rider nodded and turned away. The other 2 followed, disappearing like smoke. Into the woods. He returned to the cabin, quiet and thoughtful. Ayoka met him at the door. "They come?" she asked. Eli nodded. "They're close," her face filled with emotion. She ran to the back room and returned with a beaded pouch, a token from her family. She pressed it to her heart, then to his chest. "They find me now." That night, Eli sat by the fire, sharpening his knife and oiling his rifle. Whatever was coming next, it would not be simple. If the Cherokee clan arrived, there'd be questions. Fear, maybe anger. But they deserved to know what happened to Ayoka, and if those raiders were still out there, they'd come back too. Men like that always did when they realized the girl they tried to kill was still breathing. Smoke was in the air. And war was whispering on the wind. The sun burned through the prairie mist the next morning, turning the golden fields into waves of light. Eli stood on his porch, chewing on a piece of dried jerky, eyes scanning the distant tree line. The strange smoke signals had stopped, But the memory of those silent Cherokee riders hadn't left him. He knew the woods were alive now, alive. With eyes, with warriors, with questions. Inside, Ioka was humming softly to herself while folding the spare blanket. Her face had more color, her strength more sure. Each day she grew steadier. But Eli also noticed the way she flinched at every hoofbeat or sudden creak. Healing was slow, and safety was fragile. Then, before noon, the quiet was broken. Eli heard the rhythmic clop of hooves from the north trail, steady, deliberate. Not a courier, not a ranch hand. Too slow for a friend. He stepped off the porch, rifle in hand but held low. From the trail rode a tall man on a black gelding, clean-shaven, with a dust-stained blue coat and saddle packs that bore a familiar mark. U.S. Cavalry. The man looked to be in his early 40s, straight posture, silver spurs, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. He wore a polished revolver on his hip and a cold look in his eyes. He pulled his horse to a stop near Eli's fence. "McCall, is it?" the man asked. "That's right," Eli said, squinting. "And you are?" "Lieutenant John Cutter, U.S. Army, Fort Garrison." Fort Garrison was over 50 miles to the east, a small outpost. Cutter wasn't here on routine patrol. Eli could feel it. "You far off your trail, Lieutenant?" Cutter smiled thinly. "Heard there was movement in these parts. Runaway from Cherokee lands. Girl about 14, dark hair. Speaks broken English." Eli didn't blink. "Haven't seen anyone like that." Cutter stared at him a long moment. "You sure about that?" Eli stepped down from the porch. "I don't lie easy, Lieutenant. You lost someone, you look elsewhere." Cutter tapped his boot against the stirrup. "Funny. A local trapper said he saw a man carrying a girl through the woods not 3 days ago. She looked injured, maybe scared. Lot of scared folks out here lately," Eli said. "Hard winter, desperate men." Cutter leaned forward slightly. "That's what we're trying to prevent, McCall. Desperation, lawlessness, especially from the tribes. One of them girls goes missing. Next thing you know, we got raids, uprisings, blood spilled. We're trying to keep peace." Eli's jaw tightened. "That why she was tied to a tree and left to die?" Cutter didn't flinch. "If someone did that, it wasn't by Army orders." "Then what orders are you following?" Cutter's smile disappeared. "Careful now, rancher." Eli held his ground. "You got any proof you're looking for someone official?" Cutter glanced toward the cabin. "Just asking questions. But if someone is harboring a tribal runaway, you understand that's a serious offense under federal policy. Trespassing, interfering with relocation, harboring fugitives. You want that kind of trouble?" Eli's voice was steady. "You threatening me, Lieutenant?" Cutter's horse turned slightly. "Just stating facts. Sometimes good men get caught in bad fires. Don't be that man." Without another word, Cutter gave a small tug on the reins and trotted off down the trail. He never looked back. That night, Eli triple-checked the locks. The storm in his gut was building. He told Ioka about the visitor. She stiffened and pressed a hand to her mouth. "Scar?" she asked quietly. "No," Eli said. "This one was clean. Straight uniform. He didn't look like a raider, but he's connected." Ioka stared into the fire. "He'd lead them. Tell others. No one will care if you vanish. You're sure it's the same man?" She nodded. "He tells soldier men take us. Quiet job, no trail, no proof." Eli ran a hand on his face. "The man he'd just spoken with, the one who smiled like a vulture and spoke in soft threats, had orchestrated the kidnapping and abuse of native girls, probably under the guise of relocation or punishment. Or worse, and now he was looking to erase the only witness left. The following morning, tracks appeared near the stream, hoof prints, 4 men. They hadn't come to the house, but they were close. Eli studied the trail and muttered, "They're circling us now." He turned to Ayoka. "You need to stay inside. No firelight after dusk. Stay low, stay silent." She nodded, but her eyes, burned with something fiercer now, fear, turned to fire. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in. A cold wind pushed through the valley. And then, without warning, it happened. A sharp knock at the door. Eli stood, rifle in hand. "Ayoka, back room, go." She obeyed instantly, slipping behind the curtain that led to the old pantry. The knock came again. Harder this time. Eli stepped forward, then flung the door open. But it wasn't Cutter. It was a Cherokee man. He stood tall, wrapped in buckskin and feathers, his hair tied back, his eyes calm and deep. Beside him were two younger warriors, faces painted with white markings. They carried bows across their backs and small tomahawks at their belts. "I am Takwali," the man said, his voice low and measured. "I come for the girl," Eli said. Nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, he stepped aside. From behind the curtain, Ayoka emerged, wide-eyed, breath catching in her throat. "Takwali," she whispered. The man crossed the threshold and dropped to one knee. "Ayoka, you are found." She rushed to him and collapsed into his arms, sobbing. The cabin filled with a silence deeper than wind, deeper than grief. Eli stepped back, hand still on the rifle, unsure of what came next. He had kept her safe. But now the warriors were here, and the fire was only just beginning. The cabin had never held so much silence. Eli stood to the side, his rifle still slung across his shoulder, watching as Ayoka clung to Takwali, her uncle. The other two, Cherokee warriors, remained near the door, their faces stone-like but alert. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the log walls. Ayoka whispered in her language, rapid, trembling words pouring from her soul after days of silence and fear. Eli couldn't understand a word, but he didn't need to. Her sobs, her relief, the way her fingers gripped the warrior's shoulder, it said everything. Takwali, a man in his late 40s with a commanding calm, listened without interrupting. Then he pulled back and gently touched her cheek. "You are safe now," he said in English, his voice like rolling thunder. "No more pain, no more fear." Eli cleared his throat quietly. "I didn't know if anyone was coming for her." Takwali turned his dark eyes toward him. They were intelligent, measuring. "You found her?" Eli nodded. "Tied to a tree, beaten, barely alive. And you brought her here?" "Wasn't going to leave her to die." Takwali studied him, and a moment passed between the two men, one of cautious respect. "You are a stranger," Takwali said. "But you have a good spirit." Eli didn't reply. Compliments made him uncomfortable. The youngest of the warriors finally spoke. "Why do you risk your home for her?" Eli looked at him. "Because no one else did." After Ayoka was fed and wrapped in furs by the fire, Takwali asked to speak with Eli outside. The night was cold, but the moon was high and full, painting the prairie silver. "We have been tracking her for many days," Takwali said as they walked. "She was taken during our winter ceremony by white men dressed as soldiers. They left no trail, but we found the remains of their camp. Broken fire pits, bones. One of the other girls did not survive." Eli's jaw clenched. "She said they were led by a man with authority, a U.S. Army badge." Takwali nodded. "We know the one. His name is Cutter." Eli's face darkened. "We have seen him before. He calls us strays. He claims to follow federal orders, but he does what he wants. He trades girls like horses, sometimes for money, sometimes for favors." Eli spat into the dirt. "That man came to my porch, asking questions, real polite like, but it was a threat." "Did he know you had her?" I said no, but he's not a fool." Takwali looked out over the field. They will come again. Soon, Eli nodded grimly. Then we'll be ready. The warriors made camp not far from the ranch, near the stream, where trees gave them cover. They would stay hidden. Watch the road. If Cutter or his men returned, they'd know. The next day, Ayoka sat with her uncle beside the fire pit, speaking in soft tones. From time to time, she glanced toward Eli, as if making sure he was still nearby. That afternoon, Takwali approached. Eli with something wrapped in deerhide. For you, he said. A gift. Eli unwrapped it and found a long hunting knife beautifully carved, with a hilt wrapped in sinew and a blade etched with tribal markings. It is not just a weapon, Takwali explained. It is a vow. When you carry this, you walk between two worlds, ours and theirs. Eli looked at the knife, then back at Takwali. I ain't Cherokee. No, the warrior said. But you are not like them either. Later, as they sat under the stars, Takwali shared more of their story. The warrior clan was not a war party in the traditional sense. They did not raid or seek vengeance. They were defenders, protectors of what remained after treaties had been broken, land stolen, families ripped apart. Their presence here was both sacred and necessary. We do not kill for glory, Takwali said, but when blood is spilled unjustly, we do not forget. Eli listened in silence. The fire between them danced and the prairie wind whispered through the grass. I used. To think I knew this land, Eli said finally. Turns out I was only looking at it from one side. Takwali nodded slowly. Most men never see both sides. That is their curse. That night, Ayoka slept peacefully for the first time since arriving. Eli kept watch at the porch, rifle. Across his lap, eyes trained on the trail Cutter had taken. Just before dawn, one of the Cherokee scouts returned. His voice was urgent low. 4 riders. South Trail. Uniforms. One is Cutter. Eli stood immediately. He's early. Takwali was already moving, organizing the men. They will come to speak. But they may come to burn. Eli looked toward his barn, where old plows and tools sat rusting. We make a stand, he said. Takwal, I gripped his shoulder. Not just a stand. A message. Before long, the 4 riders appeared on the horizon. Cutter rode in front, stiff-backed, scanning the cabin with a sneer. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his revolver. Eli stepped off the porch. Thought we had a conversation already, Lieutenant. Cutter's smile was icy. Turns out I don't believe you. He stepped forward, eyes glinting. You're harboring a Cherokee girl, Mackall? I'm giving you one last chance to hand her over. Takwali and the other warriors emerged from the trees in silence, bows drawn, flanking the cabin from both sides. Cutter froze. His men reached for their weapons, but the warriors were faster. Takwali stepped forward. You come again with death. We are done talking. Cutter looked around, his confidence fading. You'll hang for this, he hissed at Eli. Eli raised his rifle. Not today. The standoff ended with Cutter retreating, forced back by the sudden appearance of 6 more Cherokee men. On the ridge, they were surrounded, outnumbered, and for the first time, someone had stood up to them. As Cutter and his men rode off into the morning mist, Eli looked at Takwali. You think they'll be back? Always, the warrior said. But next time, we will not let them ride away. Eli looked back at the cabin. Ayoka standing in the doorway, stronger now, watching the horizon. He had found her tied to a tree alone, broken, lost. Now she stood among her people, and Eli stood among them. The prairie lay quiet in the aftermath of the standoff. For the first time in weeks, there were no strange hoofbeats in the dirt, no distant smoke trails rising from the hills, no shadowy figures circling the ranch. The air was still but heavy. Eli could feel it pressing down on him, like the pause. Between lightning and thunder. Inside the cabin, Ayoka helped Takwali grind herbs for medicine. Her hands, once shaking and timid, now moved with slow confidence. She still had healing to do, but she was no longer the terrified girl bound to a tree. Her voice returned in pieces, English and Cherokee mixing together. And when she laughed, it came sharp and real, like a sound the world had nearly forgotten. Eli watched from the porch, a mug of black coffee in hand, eyes trained toward the south trail. He wasn't expecting Cutter to give up. Men like that never did. But what haunted Eli more than Cutter's return was the silence in town. News should have traveled. 4 men from Fort Garrison, soldiers, no less, had been met with armed resistance. It should have caused a stir, a reaction. A reckoning. Instead. Nothing. Later that day, Takwali joined Eli outside, carrying a folded cloth. Inside was a crumpled map. This, he said, laying it on the table between them, is where the raiders made camp, 1 day east. Old trading post long abandoned. Eli leaned in. That's Holton's Crossing. Used to be a whiskey and fur stop before the war. Now it is Cutter's place, Takwali said. He calls it a holding station, but it is a prison. A grave for girls. Eli's stomach turned. You seen it? Takwali nodded. We found ashes, bones, shackles in the dirt. He has done this before, McCall. Eli's jaw tightened. And no one stopped him? Takwali looked out across the plains. Who? Well, listen, the law, the army. To them, we are ghosts. Paper people. Our word means nothing. Eli was quiet. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine and ash. I didn't know, he said finally, what they were doing. I thought most of that ended after the treaties. Takwali didn't answer right away. You are not the first white man to say that. I believed what I was told, that the army was keeping peace, not, Eli stopped himself, not burning children alive. Takwali's voice was calm, but filled with old fire. Peace is only kept for those whose land was never taken, whose sons were never hung, whose daughters were not tied to trees. Eli stared down at his hands, calloused, blistered, once proud of the work they'd done. But now he saw the blood underneath. That evening, the Cherokee warriors gathered near the fire pit outside the cabin. They spoke in hushed tones, planning, preparing. Ayoka sat beside her uncle, listening closely. Eli approached and asked, You planning to ride on the outpost? Takwali looked up. We plan to burn it, Eli frowned. That won't bring the girls back. No, Takwali agreed. But it will stop others from being taken. Eli sat down beside him. Then let me ride with you. There was a pause. The other warriors glanced at each other. One, a younger man named Sula, spoke, sharply in Cherokee. Takwali held up a hand and answered in a calm voice. Then he turned back to Eli. They do not trust you yet. You are still a man of their skin. Then I'll earn it, Eli said. I have no place among them either. The next morning, Eli saddled his horse and rode toward town alone. He had unfinished business. The ride into Ash Valley was uneventful. But the town felt different now, quieter, tense. Men stood on porches with rifles they hadn't carried weeks ago. Women ushered their children inside at the sound of unfamiliar hooves. Eli dismounted outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Amos Harlan, an aging lawman with a belly more used to pies than pistols, looked up as Eli entered. McCall, he said. Warily, you've been gone a while. I've been busy, Eli replied. Had to save a girl from being murdered on my land. The sheriff's face tightened. You talking about that Indian child? Eli stepped closer. Her name's Ayoka. She was kidnapped, beaten, left to die. And the man who did it wears your badge." Sheriff Harlan sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Now hold on. You know what Cutter's been doing," Eli growled. "You knew, and you let it happen. You think I can tell the Army what to do?" Harlan snapped. "You think I don't have orders to?" "Orders from who?" Eli demanded. "Whose blood is worth less than yours?" The sheriff stood, voice rising. "We keep the peace here, McCall. You start a war with Fort Garrison, you're going to bring that fire down on every settler, every ranch, every family in the valley. You think you're protecting that girl, but you're putting a noose around all our necks." Eli stared at him. "Then maybe some of us deserve to hang." He turned and walked out. Back at the ranch, the Cherokee warriors were readying their gear, spears, rifles. Oil.Tech WAL I looked up as Eli approached. "They won't help," Eli said. "Sheriff's afraid. Says your life ain't worth the peace." Takwali gave a dry smile. "It never was." Eli looked to Ayoka. "Then we burn it down." As night fell, Eli packed extra ammunition, his old Colt .45 and the hunting knife Takwali had given him. Ayoka approached with a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a carved pendant, a small bear carved from river stone. "My father wore it," she said. "Now you." Eli tied it around his neck. "I'll bring it back." She shook her head. "Bring yourself back." The warriors rode out just after sundown, 7 of them, with Eli among them. The moon was low and red, casting a bloody light across the open land. As they crossed into the dark hills beyond the ranch, Takwali raised a hand. The men halted. The distant glow of fire flickered just over the ridge, the outpost, a place of bone and blood. And tonight it would burn. The riders approached the ridge in silence. The moon, red as old blood, hung low over the prairie, casting long shadows across the earth. The only sounds were the muffled hooves of the Cherokee war horses and the steady creak of Eli McCall's saddle leather as he rode alongside Takwali and the warriors. From the top of the ridge, the ruined outpost came into view. Holton's Crossing. It wasn't much now. A collapsed fence line, the remains of an old trading post rotting in place, and 3 newer cabins built crudely on the foundation. Smoke curled from one of the chimneys. Lantern light flickered through a gap in the wooden shutters. "This is it," Takwali said grimly. "Their den." Eli scanned the perimeter with a practiced eye. 2 men walking patrol, probably more inside. Horses tethered behind the rear bunkhouse. Sula, the youngest warrior, crouched low in the brush. "We hit fast, loud, fire in the corners, cut the horses loose. If they run, we follow." Eli turned to Takwali. "What about prisoners?" Takwali's eyes were like flint. "We take back what is ours. The rest we leave to the flames." The plan unfolded in minutes. Takwali and 2 warriors circled wide through the trees to approach the bunkhouse from the east. Sula and another warrior would take the stables. Eli was assigned to the west cabin, where Cutter likely slept. He didn't ask how they knew. He just nodded and loaded his rifle. Then they moved. Eli crept through the brush, boots silent, body low. Every instinct from his old hunting days kicked in. His breath slowed, his heartbeat steady. He was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something larger, older. He carried justice on his back like a rifle. The first shot cracked the night. Open. It came from the stables, Sula's bow thudding into a sentry's chest. A sharp cry, then silence. Then fire. The first flames erupted from the dry hay pile near the horse corral. The wind took it eagerly, throwing fire onto the stable roof. The horses shrieked and thrashed in panic. Men inside the bunkhouse roared in confusion, rushing out with rifles and pistols. Too late. The warriors were waiting. Eli stormed the west cabin. The door was locked, but one kick sent it flying open. Inside Cutter. He stood in his underclothes, pistol half raised, surprise flashing across his face. "You," Cutter snarled. "You knew I'd come," Eli said. The pistol fired. Eli ducked, splinters flying beside his head. He charged forward, slamming into Cutter, knocking the weapon from his hand. They crashed into the table, scattering whiskey bottles and documents. Cutter punched hard, but Eli blocked and struck back, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The lieutenant staggered. "You're no lawman," Eli growled. "You're a butcher." Cutter pulled a knife, slashing wild. Eli caught his wrist, twisted hard bone cracked. Cutter howled. Eli raised his rifle stock and brought it down once. Twice. Cutter slumped to the floor, blood trailing from his temple. Outside, flames were roaring. Shadows danced across the burning buildings as the Cherokee warriors took control. One man tried to flee through the trees, but a whistle of an arrow ended him before he reached the woods. A scream from the far cabin drew Eli's attention. Inside, 2 girls no older than Ioka were shackled to the floor. Terrified, thin, muzzled with cloth tied over their mouths, Eli shouted, "In here!" Takwoli burst in seconds later, blade flashing, cutting their bonds. One of the girls collapsed into his arms, sobbing. The other could barely stand. "These are the missing," Takwoli said. "We thought them gone." "They ain't now," Eli said. "We take them home." By dawn, the outpost was ashes. Cutter was tied to a horse, unconscious but alive. The Cherokee had voted not to kill him, not yet. His crimes needed to be told, shown, brought to the world like disease pulled into the sun. The girls, too weak to ride, were wrapped in blankets and carried by horseback. Eli looked back once before. Leaving, the outpost was gone. The flames had cleansed it, but the smoke carried stories that would never leave the air. That evening, they returned to the ranch. Ioka came running from the porch when she saw them, her voice cracking with joy when she spotted the girls. She embraced them, weeping. One was her cousin. The other, a friend. Eli watched quietly. He didn't need thanks. I came to his side. "You did not have to ride with us," he said. "I did," Eli replied. "I just didn't know it until it was too late to turn back." The warrior nodded. "You carry our blood now, Eli McCall. Not in your veins, but in your bones." That night, the fire was brighter than ever. The Cherokee sang songs, old ones, mourning and victory woven together. Ioka joined them, her voice steady. Eli sat alone for a while, looking out at the plains. He had lost a family once. Fire had taken them, but now, through fire again, something had returned. A girl, a people, a purpose. And in the ashes of a ruined outpost, something had been born. A new kind of justice. The sun rose quiet over the plains, golden light stretching across the scorched earth where once a nightmare had stood. But back at the ranch, peace hung in the air like fragile thread, easily broken, but beautiful while it lasted. Ioka stood at the edge of Eli's pasture with the 2 rescued girls, watching the horses graze in the warm morning light. She didn't speak much, but her presence was different now, rooted, grounded. She no longer flinched at every sound. Her shoulders had lifted from the weight of fear. She belonged again, not just to the earth or to her people, but to herself. Eli watched from the porch, sipping his coffee. He could hardly believe it had only been 2 weeks since he found her, tied and broken at the edge of the woods. Now she stood with strength in her eyes and wind in her hair, like something returned from the other side of death. But even as the ranch came alive with movement, there was one presence that hung in the back of Eli's mind. Cutter, the rogue. Lieutenant still lay in the barn, bound at the wrists and ankles, under guard by 2 Cherokee warriors. Takwali had insisted he remain alive for justice, for testimony, for the truth that had to be told to those who would listen. But Eli wasn't sure who that was anymore. Later that morning, Takwali found Eli mending the west fence. The older warrior stood silently for a moment before speaking. "We ride in 3 days," he said. Eli didn't stop working. "Where to?" "South," Takwali said. "To the tribal council at Broken Mesa. The elders must see Cutter. Hear the girls speak. If we let him disappear, the crimes disappear with him." Eli tightened the wire with a grunt. "He won't make it easy. He won't have a choice." The two men stood in silence for a while, watching the wind sweep through the grass like waves on an invisible sea. "You will come with us," Takwali added. It wasn't a question. Eli finally looked at him. "You sure I belong at a tribal council?" "You are part of this now," Takwali said. "You walked into our fire and did not turn away. That makes you witness. It makes you blood." Eli swallowed and gave a quiet nod. That night, Ayoka came to Eli with a folded piece of parchment. "I drew this," she said shyly. He opened it. It was a simple sketch, rough but clear. It showed a tall man with a long rifle standing beside a smaller figure with braids. Behind them, a fire. Above them, stars. "That's you," she said softly. "And me, first night at the cabin." Eli stared at it for a long moment. "No one's ever drawn me before," he said. She grinned faintly. "Now someone did." He folded it carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Thank you." The next morning, Eli went to the barn. Cutter was awake, face bruised, pride even more wounded. He glared at Eli like a snake waiting for a boot to lift. "You should have killed me," Cutter muttered. Eli stood by the stall. "You're going to face people who remember what justice smells like." Cutter sneered. "You think they'll listen? You think anyone cares what a bunch of redskins say? They'll hang me? Maybe. But it won't change anything." Eli's eyes were cold. "It'll change them." He stepped closer. "And it'll change me." The next day, they prepared to leave. The Cherokee wrapped Cutter in thick hides and tied him to a travois. The girls, still recovering, would ride behind Takwali and another warrior. Eli saddled his old mare and packed light. He wore the Riverstone bear pendant Ayoka had given him. It felt heavier now, not in weight, but in meaning. As they rode out, Ayoka stood by the fence, waving. "Will you come back?" she asked. Eli paused. "You still want me to?" She nodded. "I'll be back," he said. "If the wind doesn't steal me first." She smiled, a real one, and watched until the riders disappeared into the rising dust. They rode south for 2 days. The plains gave way to rolling hills, then to rocky bluffs, then finally to the deep canyons that cradled Broken Mesa, a sacred place, hidden and high, where warriors and elders gathered when words were more powerful than bullets. At the top of the mesa stood a ring of stone. Fires burned in pits. Elders waited, some wrapped in blankets, others in war paint, all with eyes that had seen far more than time should allow. Takwali led Cutter forward like a prisoner of war. The murmurs grew as the lieutenant was thrown to the center of the ring. "This man," Takwali said in Cherokee, then again in English for Eli's sake, "has stolen our daughters, has burned our sacred places, has mocked our dead. Let his face be seen. Let his lies be broken." The youngest of the rescued girls stepped forward. She spoke not just of chains, but of words that cut deeper, of fear that stained the bones. Her voice trembled, then rose. The second girl, Ayoka's cousin, spoke next. Her words came like rain after fire, soft, but cleansing. Then the elders asked questions. Eli stepped forward when called. "I found her," he said, "tied up like an animal, left to die. No crime, no trial, just hate." One elder turned to Cutter. "Do you deny these things?" Cutter's mouth twisted. "They're savages, all of them." That was enough. He was taken, not to be lynched or gutted, but judged not as a soldier, but as a man. That night, Eli sat near the edge of the mesa, staring out over the moonlit canyon. Takwali joined him. "The people believe in what you did," Takwali said. Eli nodded. "I didn't do it for belief." "No," the warrior said. "You did it because it was right." They sat in silence for a while. "You still going back to that ranch?" Takwali asked. Ile looked down at the bear pendant hanging over his shirt. "I think I got someone waiting on me." At dawn, the sentence was passed. Cutter would be returned to Fort Garrison under the guard of 3 tribes, with the council's decree and signed testimony from witnesses. His trial would be public. The U.S. Army would be forced to answer for him. For the first time in decades, the wind carried more than sorrow from the mesa. It carried the sound of reckoning. 3 days after the council at Broken Mesa, the company rode north. Cutter, bound and silent, lay slumped on the travois behind Eli's horse. 3 Cherokee warriors flanked them, one bearing the council's decree written in both English and Cherokee, signed and sealed by elders. It was a document as powerful as a bullet and twice as dangerous in the right hands. The sun was harsh, but the air was still. As they approached Fort Garrison, a crooked collection of timber walls and smoke-stained buildings, a hush fell over the group. To most travelers, Fort Garrison was just another remote outpost along the western edge of so-called civilization. But to the Cherokee riders and Eli McCall, it was something else. It was where the blood trail began. And today it would end. The guards at the gate looked confused as the group approached. It wasn't every day that a rancher and a group of armed Cherokee warriors rode up with a bound used lieutenant like he was a sack of grain. "Identify yourselves," barked a bearded sentry, leveling a rifle. Takwali rode forward slowly. His voice was steady. "We bring a prisoner. Lieutenant John Cutter, under the authority of the Cherokee Tribal Council and witnessed by citizen Eli McCall. We request audience with your commanding officer." The guard's eyes widened when he recognized the man tied behind Eli. "Holy hell, that's Cutter." Another soldier ran off toward the command building. Eli dismounted and helped steady the girls riding with them. They were covered in blankets and dirt from the ride, but held themselves tall. There was no more shrinking, no more silence. These girls had stared evil in the eye, and now they were here to name it. Colonel William Hafford, the post commander, emerged with 2 lieutenants flanking him. A grizzled Civil War veteran with a long scar down one side of his neck, Hafford was not a man who liked surprises, especially ones that involved disgrace. "You bring serious claims," he said coldly, scanning the papers Takwali handed him. "Kidnapping, assault, murder, slavery under Army colors." Eli stepped forward. "We have survivors, eyewitnesses, names." Cutter led it all. Hafford looked down at Cutter, who spat blood into the dirt and grinned. "Boys like you never learn, do you? You think truth matters out here?" "You're gonna find out it does," Eli said darkly. Hafford turned to the Cherokee. "You are on military property now. These are Army matters." Takwali did not blink. "We are not here to ask your permission. We are here to show you the truth." That truth was made known inside the command tent. The 2 girls, escorted by the warriors, told their story to Hafford and the senior officers, slowly, in clear, unbroken words. How Cutter and his men raided their villages under cover of night, how they disguised their actions as federal relocation efforts, how the girls were chained, hidden, and beaten for resisting, how others didn't survive. Ayoka's cousin, the older of the 2, removed her blanket and showed the scar on her, back from where a soldier's belt had split her skin open. Then Eli spoke. I found one of them tied to a tree, left for dead. Like she was a warning sign. Cutter came to my ranch 2 days later, not to ask questions, but to make sure she didn't live long enough to speak. Hafford listened in silence, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. I served with Cutter at Antietam, he finally said. He was reckless even then, but I never thought. You didn't want to, Eli cut in. Just like the sheriff back in Ash Valley. You didn't want to see it, so you let it happen. Hafford looked like he'd been slapped. He turned to one of his lieutenants. Place Cutter in irons. Full arrest. I want all his patrol records pulled. Every name, every route. If anyone else was involved, I want them found. Cutter laughed as he was dragged to his feet. You think these savages are going to win a case in an army courtroom? You think the government cares? Eli stepped up, nose inches from Cutter's. They will, Cutter sneered. And if they don't, then I know where to find you. Cutter was locked away in the fort's holding cell, under guard. No more whiskey. No more power. Just bars and shame. The girls were offered shelter by a missionary camp nearby where Cherokee-speaking nuns took them in gently. Takwali made arrangements for them to be returned home under guard. He left them with blessings and small woven pouches of cedar to protect them. When it was done, Eli stood with Takwali near the gate. You think they'll hang him? Eli asked. Takwal. I shook his head. I think they'll try to bury him quietly. Eli sighed. Then we keep digging, loudly. Takwali gave a rare smile. That is why we rode with you. As they mounted their horses to return west, the wind picked up again clean and dry. The fort faded behind them, just a silhouette. Against the rising sun. You will return to your ranch now? Takwali asked. Eli looked out across the hills. I will. And the girl? Eli smiled softly. I reckon she's waiting on me. They rode hard and silent through the long afternoon, the wind at their backs. Every mile from Fort Garrison was a mile away from darkness and one closer to something like peace. And when the ranch finally came into view, with smoke curling softly from the chimney and a single figure standing near the fence line, Eli felt something shift in his chest. Home. Yoka saw them before they reached the gate. She ran out barefoot, dress fluttering in the wind. Eli dismounted before his horse stopped moving. They didn't speak. She simply wrapped her arms around him, and he held her close, the silence between them more powerful than any word. The warrior clan had come. Justice had been delivered, but something more had been found across miles of pain, fire, and survival. Family. Weeks passed. The prairie, once scorched and restless, breathed again under the soft rains of spring. Grass returned to the hills, wildflowers dotted the edges of the stream near Eli's ranch, and the long silence that had once haunted the land gave way to birdsong and laughter. But something deeper had changed too, something in the soul of the place. And in the people who now called it home, Eli McCall had returned a different man. Cutter's trial became a spark in distant headlines. Word traveled slowly from Fort Garrison to the State House and eastward beyond the mountains. The official reports claimed misconduct, abuse of authority, disgraceful conduct under the uniform of the United States Army. But the Cherokee told it differently. They told of blood debts repaid, of a warrior clan that rode without fear, of a white rancher who had stepped across a line others wouldn't even see, who had not only found a child abandoned, but stood with her tribe when the fire came. It became a story passed down in hush and reverence. And back on the ranch, life moved forward. Yoka stayed. It wasn't spoken aloud, not at first. But when the clan rode on after the girls were safely returned, she didn't pack a satchel or say goodbye. She simply stood beside Eli on the porch and watched them disappear across the hills. Takwali looked back only once. He didn't wave. He simply nodded. And that was enough. Now. She worked alongside Eli, learning to mend fences, tend to the horses, water the orchard. Her hands had grown calloused, her arms stronger. But her spirit was still light. She sang sometimes in the early mornings, soft Cherokee lullabies that drifted across the land like wind through tall grass. Eli had built her a small room in the back of the cabin, a space of her own, with the sketch she'd drawn of them hung on the wall. Her bear pendant now hung on a nail above the bed. It was hers once, but she had given it to him. "You carry the fire now," she had said. One morning, as they fixed the northern fence line together, Ayoka turned suddenly and asked, "Do you ever miss before?" Eli paused, leaning on a post. "Before what?" "Before me." He looked out across the land. Before her, the ranch had been a place of silence, of ghosts. His days had passed like shadows across a stone. No direction. Number. Warmth. "Just survival. Not for a second," he said. She smiled. And they returned to work. Occasionally, travelers passed through the odd rancher. An army scout, a few locals from Ash Valley who'd finally heard whispers of what happened at Fort Garrison. Most didn't ask questions. But those who did were told just enough to understand. There'd been wrong done, and there'd been justice delivered. One afternoon, a letter arrived by courier. It bore a federal seal, hand-stamped in wax. Inside, news from the East. John Cutter had been convicted, stripped of rank, sentenced to life and hard labor. No appeal. No mercy. His name struck from the rolls. Eli read the letter aloud on the porch. When he finished, Ayoka said nothing. She simply nodded, then turned back to feeding the chickens. Some victories didn't need celebration. Just knowing was enough. As the months rolled on, so did the seasons. The orchard bloomed, calves were born, storms came and passed. But the fire, that first fire, never left. It wasn't the kind that burned barns or fences. It was quieter now, steadier. It lived in Eli's eyes when he watched the sunrise, in Ayoka's laughter when she ran with the colts, in the way the house never felt empty anymore. And in the way every tree on the property stood like a sentry now, guarding memory, guarding the past. One evening, just after dusk, Ayoka lit a small fire in the clearing near the stream. Eli joined her, and they sat quietly, side by side, watching the flames. She held a small pouch of herbs and sprinkled them into the fire: cedar, sweetgrass, crushed bark. The smoke curled upward, spiraling into the night sky. "For them," she said, "the ones who didn't come back." Eli nodded. "And for those who did," he added. They sat there until the fire burned low, listening to the crickets and the rustling trees. No more gunfire, no more screams. Just peace, earned peace. Ayoka eventually turned to Eli, a question in her eyes. "What are we now?" she asked. Eli thought for a long moment. "We're what the fire left behind," he said. Tilted her head, curious. "And what is that?" He looked at her, really looked, and smiled. "Family." And from that night on, neither of them was ever truly alone again. What had started as a rescue became something far more powerful. It was not just a story of survival. It was a story of rebirth. A lonely rancher, a stolen Cherokee girl, and a clan that came not just to reclaim her, but to light a fire that would never again be forgotten.